That's incredible. Does it make him the greatest right-handed hitter of all time? I think there are some other players who might want to join the conversation. Welcome everyone to the Monday edition of Fair Territory, the first show of the season, with the season actually in full progress. And of course, over the weekend, we had a lot of interesting things happen. I'm going to get to some of the great performances that we've already seen from some great players, and a performance from one great player that hasn't gone exactly well. But first, I want to get into the controversy of the day, or should I call it the stupid controversy of the day. This revolves around the Torpedo bats, the new bats, actually not even so new, that some of the Yankees were using, that Michael Kay, their broadcaster, pointed out on their broadcast during that wild game on Saturday, the 9-homer game, in which the Yankees came within one home run of the Major League record. Now, you might have seen in the aftermath a quote from Brewers pitcher Trevor Megill. This made its way around the internet and social media yesterday, and Trevor Megill was quoted as saying, "It's the Yankees, so they'll let it slide," referring, of course, to the redesigned bats. Trevor Megill, if I'm not mistaken, later said he was taken out of context, misquoted, whatever. A lot of other people on the internet chimed in with similar reactions, including Dave Portnoy, the head of Barstool Sports. You heard this all day long, Saturday and Sunday. What are the Yankees doing? It's something illegal. The usual conspiracy theory garbage that we get on social media. So let me point out, one, that Major League Baseball came out immediately and said these bats were legal. And let me point out, two, and most important, because no one's going to believe Major League Baseball, of course, because why not start another conspiracy? Pointing out, too, that, I don't know, every other team seems to be doing this as well, or at least a number of teams and a number of players. Let's go right in rapid fire through the AL East. Baltimore Orioles. Did the Baltimore Orioles use torpedo bats? Orioles hitting coach Cody Ashley says a couple of their players have dabbled with the torpedo bats that the Yankees used in their 9-homer game. Pretty good business right there, right? All right, that's the Baltimore Orioles. Let's go to the next one. This would be, the Tampa Bay Rays. Oh, yes. Rays Junior Caminero confirmed he was using one of those torpedo-style bats that are suddenly all the rage during his pinch hit appearance. Mark Topkin of the Tampa Bay Times later added Yandy Diaz was using the bats as well. All right, here we go with the Toronto Blue Jays, another team in the AL East. Davis Schneider, who has used the torpedo bat and will continue to use the torpedo bat, said, "It's a big-ass barrel, and I like big barrels." So let's see. That's three teams in the AL East besides the Yankees. Alex Cora, the Red Sox manager, was quoted as saying, "You know what? Our guys tried them in spring, and some of them didn't like them, so they're not using them." This is just a way of redistributing the weight of a bat to give the hitter a better chance to hit it on the sweet spot. There is nothing illegal about it, and this is the kind of stuff, again, that circulates only in this day and age, only in this age of social media where everyone is an expert, everyone has an opinion, and very few people are actually informed. I want to go back now also just to refer to a story that I wrote 2 years ago now. And this was about Austin Riley visiting the Marucci Bat Factory in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And you see, it's inside the high-tech hitting labs where Austin Riley and other MLB stars test their bats. And in that story, I explained how baseball players now are doing what golfers are doing, getting bats fitted for them, similar to what golfers do when they get their clubs fitted to them and their specific needs and styles or whatever. Well, in that story, I dealt with the hockey puck knobs, which are those new handles that came out a few years ago, which several players continue to use. That was another modification of the bat that people used and was perfectly legal. Folks, calm down. Stop with the insanity. Stop with the stupidity. This was perfectly legal. Lots of players are using torpedo bats. Lots of players are going to continue to use them. And like a lot of other technological advancements in the sport, they're designed to help players. That's what we want, the players performing at their best. Nothing illegal about them, nothing corked, nothing doctored in any bad way at all. All right, let's get back to the field. Let's get to the real stuff, the actual baseball that occurred over the weekend. And I want to talk about three huge stars in the game and their performances. Start with, Juan Soto. Let's start with him. Juan Soto opening day strikes out against Josh Hader in the ninth inning. Kind of a weird swing for Juan Soto against the Hader slider. It looked like a really weak hack, the kind that you rarely ever see Soto take. Well, what happens the next day? He comes back. He's facing Hunter Brown of the Astros, and he notices Hunter Brown against the Mets' other left-handed hitters, Jesse Winker and Brett Baty, was kind of going with cutters and doing some things that Soto picked up on. And he noticed that Hunter Brown was throwing those pitches to those hitters, the cutters, to the left-handed hitters. And Soto picked up on this, and Soto thought, okay, that's what I'm going to sit on. Well, what resulted? His first home run as a New York Met. Now, this is typical of Soto. He is among the most talented hitters in the game besides that, and among the most disciplined hitters besides that. He is one of the smartest hitters. Mets hitting coach Jeremy Barnes told me that he basically is playing three-dimensional chess up there, and that was an example of that. In Saturday's game, the third game of the series, Hader and Soto were at it again in the ninth inning. Hader threw him 6 straight sliders, walked Soto. Soto off to his usual good start. This guy is an amazing player, but he's not the only one, of course. We'll be back after a quick word from our friends at Foul Territory.
Alana, we love our pups dearly, and we want to shout out Spot and Tango for taking care of our pups with their unkibble. They are a game changer.
A game changer is right, Scott. And you know anything about me, you know that I love dogs and I want them to live forever. My own rescue pup, Bentley, is my passion, and she loves Spot and Tango, thank goodness. It's 100% human-grade ingredients, so you know exactly what your dog is getting. Oftentimes in other forms of dog food, you have no idea what's in it. It's a bunch of fillers. She loves it. It helps keep her healthy. It's perfectly customized for her age, her breed, her weight, and her level of activity. Makes me happy to give it to her.
And you don't have to go to the store. They'll deliver it right to your door. Spot and Tango is offering an exclusive deal for the FT network. For a limited time, go to spotandtango.com/foul. Use code FOUL for 50% off your first order. That's spotandtango.com/foul, code FOUL for 50% off your first order. One more time for the pups out there. Code FOUL at spotandtango.com/foul.
Let's also talk about Mookie Betts. Now, Mookie Betts, you've read about him. He lost weight because of a stomach ailment, dropped from 175 to 155. Now, Mookie at 175 is not exactly the biggest guy in the world to begin with. And when he dropped to 155, of course, he did not play the 2 games in Japan. He was questionable for the Dodgers opener, but returned to the field and played opening day. And then in his second game, Friday night, home run in the 8th inning, 3-run walk-off homer in the 10th. 2 homers for Mookie Betts in his second game back. He still didn't weigh 175, his full weight. He was about 165 in his estimation, and yet he did this. And you saw how emotional he was going around the bases. This for Mookie is pretty demonstrative, I'll say it that way. And why was he demonstrative? Because, of course, he had been so frustrated with the weight loss and everything he was going through, and he was happy to be back being Mookie Betts again, even 10 pounds down. Mookie Betts does a lot of remarkable things on a baseball field. Friday night was one of them. And finally, I have to mention, Mr. Aaron Judge. 3 home runs Saturday, including a grand slam, and the Yankees' 9-homer eruption. Another home run on Sunday. His OPS is something like 2.500, right around there. He already leads the major leagues in OPS. He is just an amazing player. And Joel Sherman wrote an interesting column in the New York Post over the weekend saying, you know what, with Soto and all the talk about him, you kind of forget how good Aaron Judge is. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we've got another big star off to a horrible start. And of course, I'm talking about Rafael Devers. His numbers are astonishing. 0 for 16, 12 strikeouts. Now, with all of this, you have to remember it's early in the season, and these sample sizes are ridiculously small. And you have to remember as well with Devers, he's gone through these funks before. Maybe not 0 for 16 with 12 strikeouts, but probably he has. He has had periods in his career where he just looks absolutely lost. I'm quite confident he will come out of it. But the issue now with Devers is, okay, he's at a new spot. He's DHing for the first time full-time in his career. Can he become and still be the player that he was as a third baseman? That question is going to hang over Devers until he starts hitting again, which I fully anticipate he will. And the Red Sox, You can see why now they wanted this alignment. Devers at DH, Alex Bregman at third, Christian Campbell at second. Christian Campbell is really good. They knew he was really good, and this is why they aligned it this way. Devers is going to have to get used to this. He will get used to it. DHing is not an easy thing to do. I've talked with David Ortiz about this, other DHs over the years, and they will tell you, you've got to develop a routine. You've got to get to a point where you're comfortable in that spot. It will happen for Rafael Devers. I don't know if it will happen the way it did for Mookie and Judge and Soto. But again, one of the reasons we love this sport is watching great players do great things, and a lot of great things happened over the weekend. Time now for the Inside Dish, the part of the show where I talk about maybe a story I've written, a trend in the game, or something from my deep, dark past. And I'm going to go to the deep, dark past today. I'm going to talk about a game from 1987, a game that came to my mind over the weekend as I watched the Yankees nearly tie the record for most home runs in a game by a single team. I was at the game in which the record was set. It happened in 1987. The record, as I pointed out on X, for home runs by an AL/NL team in a single game is 10. Set by the Toronto Blue Jays against the Baltimore Orioles, September 14th, 1987. I covered the game for the late Baltimore Evening Sun. I said late because that paper no longer exists. It was the night Cal Ripken Jr.'s consecutive inning streak ended. He was replaced by none other than, yes, Ron Washington. The game was at the old Exhibition Stadium in Toronto. Ripken's father, Cal Ripken Sr., was the Orioles manager. Ernie Witt hit 3 homers, Rance Mulliniks 2, George Bell 2, Lloyd Mosby, Rob Ducey, and Fred McGriff each had 1. I'm laughing in the middle of this. That's why I can't get through it. I remember these home runs like they were yesterday. Now, this was my first year covering baseball. I was just about to turn 25, and I really didn't have a clue about what was going on, and I was very inexperienced as both a reporter and a writer. And that night, I did write a story about the game. Of course, it was a game story, working for an evening paper, so I had a lot of time to work on it. Evening paper deadlines were like at 6 in the morning. So basically what I wrote was a memo, an open memo to the commissioner of baseball at the time, Peter Ueberroth. That's how long ago this was. And I basically pleaded for Ueberroth to suspend the Orioles season right then and there because, let's face it, it wasn't going all that well. Well, Ueberroth did not suspend the season. There's the story right there. That's actual newsprint, folks. You still see that from time to time today. There's no link to this story on the internet because there was no internet back then. That's the story. And obviously, as I said, the season was not suspended. And next year, coming off a 95 loss season, the Orioles were even worse. They lost their first 21 games, and I couldn't pull out the memo to the commissioner card because I had already played it. Anyway, that wasn't the only thing that happened that night, the 10 homers. As I alluded to earlier, that was the night also that Cal Ripken Sr., the manager of the Orioles at the time, ended the inning streak of Cal Ripken Jr. Now, most fans know about Cal Ripken Jr.'s consecutive game streak. He, of course, has the record. He broke Lou Gehrig's mark. It is one of the most famous records in baseball and one that I'm sure will never be broken. Well, before the game streak, actually during the game streak, he also had, for more than 5 years, a streak of over 8,000 innings in which he played every inning of every game. Never came out, not even in blowouts. Well, this was a blowout. The Orioles lost 18-3, and Ripken Sr. decided that night, you know what? This inning streak, this particular thing, is too big a burden. Let's end it right now. Ron Washington, go take shortstop. Ripken Jr. was very surprised. Bill Ripken, playing second base, was very surprised. It was a crazy thing that happened, or a very unusual thing that happened, because it had not happened before, in a game that was, of course, quite unusual in its own right. So because I was working for an evening paper and had the time that I mentioned, I could work until 6 a.m. I wrote not just a long story about the 10 homers, but a long story about the inning streak and what went into Cal Ripken Sr.'s thinking and why it ended. The next day, first of all, I decide to get to the ballpark faster than anybody, earlier than anybody. I was competing, and I've talked about this a lot, against Tim Kirkchin of the Baltimore Morning Sun, only in the Hall of Fame right now, and Richard Justice of the Washington Post, who was a great beat writer as well. These two guys were extremely competitive. They beat my brains in for the whole first year and most of the second year as well, really the whole time that we were competing against each other. So I determined I was going to get to the ballpark early and talk to Cal Sr. about whether he thought his job was in jeopardy. Remember, I'm still 24 years old, about to turn 25. I am still quite inexperienced, and Cal Ripken Sr. is about the toughest man that I have ever met before and since. Tim that year would ask different people kind of a funny question. He liked to ask players and managers, hey, if you get locked in a room with a Doberman, who gets out? Well, most of the players would kind of balk at the question, say, I don't know, the Doberman. Cal Ripken Sr., when Tim asked the question, said, squinted, smoked his cigarette down to its nub, as he always did, and looked at Tim and said, that goddamn dog doesn't have a chance. That's what he said. And I'm going into his office the day after the Orioles give up 10 homers in a game, the day after Cal Jr.'s consecutive inning streak ends, and I'm going to ask Cal Ripken Sr. if he's worried about his job. Needless to say, I was scared out of my mind. Now, this was back in the day when manager press conferences were not formal, when the clubhouse was really open from the moment the ballpark opened, and you could walk in at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and find the manager who would probably be there by then. So that's what I did. I beat Tim to the ballpark. I beat Richard to the ballpark. I sat down in Rip Sr.'s office, and I asked him the question, are you worried about getting fired? He looked at me. I thought he was going to erupt, and it was quite the opposite. What he said was, last night was one of the most embarrassing displays in Major League history. Of course I'm worried about getting fired. I am sure they are thinking about firing me. Why wouldn't they be thinking about firing me after a game like that? So that was a big relief. But also in the clubhouse that day, Cal Jr. approached me. Now, Cal Jr. was thinking about the end of his streak, and he had been made aware, because there was no internet, somebody must have told him, that I had written a long story about the end of that streak. And he asked me why I wrote a long story about that streak, or the end of that streak, when Tim and Richard had not. Well, Tim and Richard were working for morning papers. The game had dragged on because the Orioles had given up 10 homers, and they didn't have time to really write more than a few paragraphs each. Well, that day was kind of the beginning of the end of a great relationship that I hoped would develop with Rip. We had a good relationship, I would say, for most of the time, but there were times where I would question things, and he didn't like that very much. So despite writing positively about him, I would say, I don't know, 90, 95% of the time, that 5%, wherever he thought of, was negative, that was what lingered with him. And that was the first one that kind of set us on a path that, I don't know, wasn't so great at times. So that is the story of the 10-homer game, the night Cal Ripken Jr.'s consecutive inning streak ended. One more thing about that game. Months later, I guess it was, the Orioles general manager at the time, the late Hank Peters, put together a video of the 10 homers. Now, he did it on VHS. There wasn't advanced video techniques back then. You couldn't get on your computer and do things. He put it together, I guess, one by one, each home run on this VHS. He called it the Barrage. And what he did with it was distribute it to different Orioles pitching coaches, including the pitching coach at the time, Mark Wiley. And I guess he distributed it as well the following spring to virtually every minor league pitcher the Orioles had. The Barrage. He didn't want to ever see anything like it again. Virtually every pitch was down the middle, and it was kind of a crazy thing. 10 homers that night at Exhibition Stadium. And as you can tell, that night, even all these years later, nearly 4 decades later, is indelible in my mind. I still think about it. I still remember it because of the aftermath, because of Rip Sr., because of Rip Jr. And over the weekend, after the Yankee game was over, I sent Tim Kirkchin and the Orioles PR director at the time, Rick Vaughn. We're on a group text together. And I sent them a text that just said, hey, long live the 1987 Orioles. Time now for Grillin Ken. Let's get to your questions. The first question comes from Drew, who asks, is Aaron Judge the greatest right-handed hitter of all time? If you watched him over the weekend, you might think so. If you watched him the last few years, you might think so. I don't know that I want to be a prisoner of the moment here and get caught up in recency bias. Aaron Judge certainly is a great right-handed hitter. And look at this tweet from Sarah Langs over the weekend, which shows you just how accomplished he is so far in his career. Aaron Judge now has 319 career home runs, Sarah wrote, 40 more than any other player in his first 1,000 career games. That's incredible. Does it make him the greatest right-handed hitter of all time? I think there are some other players who might want to join the conversation. Just from the recent generation, Miguel Cabrera, Albert Pujols, two guys with an asterisk, Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez. Then there's Mike Schmidt going back a few years. And then if you really want to go back even further, Willie Mays and Hank Aaron. And further than that, Jimmy Fox and Rogers Hornsby. Greatest right-handed hitter of all time. Let's hold off on that. Aaron Judge is really good. Let's say that for now. El Gallo 4978, who says, how worried should I be as a Diamondback fan? I'm not sure you should be worried at all. In fact, you should not be worried at all. Your team is 2-2. Had a pretty good opening series against the Cubs. Not everything went perfectly. But except for Zach Gallen in the opener, the starting pitchers were really good. I'm talking about Merrill Kelly, Eduardo Rodriguez, Brandon Pfaadt. Thursday was a 10-6 loss. That was the game Gallen started, the opener. It didn't go well for him. Ryan Nelson gave up some runs as well. Friday, an 8-1 win. Eugenio Suarez, 2 home runs. Saturday, Diamondbacks lose a one-run game. And then Sunday, they're down 6-2 in the 8th, and they score 8 runs to win the game, even the series. So I know people get upset with every moment of every game at times. That's the world we live in. If you're 2-2, coming off an opening weekend against a pretty good Cubs team, a Cubs team with Kyle Tucker hitting 2 home runs in this series, I don't think you should be particularly worried about what's going on. Kaito, who asks, out of the teams with a realistic shot of winning the World Series, who had the biggest glaring weakness after the first weekend? Kaito, I like this question. And yes, we all get crazy this time of year. We overreact to what's happening earlier. That's just the nature of human emotion. But you do see things that kind of make you scratch your head at times. And there was one team in particular that got swept that I picked to actually win the World Series, but there were 2 glaring weaknesses that came up with this club over the weekend. One, I don't believe is a weakness at all. That's their offense. I'm talking about the Atlanta Braves. Atlanta Braves were really shut down by the San Diego Padres, who had a great opening weekend, sweeping a 4-game series. But my bigger concern for the Braves is their bullpen. They really didn't address their bullpen after the season-ending injury to Joe Jimenez, and they're at a place with their payroll where they have the ability to spend a little bit more money and still stay under the luxury tax threshold. They're about $8 million under by one estimation. And yet their offseason was kind of curious. They kind of held back. They cut payroll at the start. We're kind of trying to just be flexible. Ultimately signed Jerkson Profar. But with their bullpen, they brought in some guys on minor league contracts. Hector Neris is one. Craig Kimbrell starting the season at AAA is another. And I'm just worried whether the Braves bullpen is going to be good enough. Why I didn't see this earlier as I was making my predictions, I don't know. I probably should have seen it. But that's one concern I have. And maybe Brian Snitker and the staff there will figure it out. Maybe they'll turn over that bullpen as the year goes on. That's a likely scenario. As I said, they have room for the payroll to grow a little bit come the deadline. But that bullpen kind of stuck out to me immediately. So that's my biggest concern. Perhaps a glaring weakness for the Braves, perhaps not. And finally, I have a question coming from my colleague at The Athletic, John Greenberg, who asked, quite graciously, quite nicely, do you want me to buy you this t-shirt? And it's a t-shirt from the White Sox Angels opening series of the season. I will answer this question not on X, John. I'm going to respond to you publicly, in a public forum. I'm good without the White Sox Angels opening series t-shirt. It's not quite Dodgers Cubs in Japan, put it that way. So, John, thanks so much for asking, but I've got enough t-shirts without adding the Angels and the White Sox. I want to thank everyone for their questions, everyone for watching, for listening. You know where to find us, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. We will be back Thursday at our normal time, 12:30 Eastern, live, myself and Alana Rizzo. Have a great week, everyone. Don't overreact too much.
Let's shout out the BetMGM First Bet $1,500 offer when you use the bonus code FOUL. Get that offer When you download the BetMGM Sportsbook app or at BetMGM.com, sign up, enter that bonus code FOUL, and deposit at least $10 into your new account. Place your first wager and receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if the bet loses. If the bet does lose, your bonus bets will be available once your initial wager is settled. Gambling problem or concern, call 1-800-GAMBLER.